All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome the members, the journalists of the RIAS program who are attending today's briefing. Welcome. I'd like to start off by announcing some travel. On Sunday, the 20th of October, the Secretary General will arrive in Addis Ababa to take part in the 8th African Union United Nations Annual Conference. The high-level discussions to be held on Monday, the 21st of October, will be co-chaired by Moussa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, along with Mr. Guterres. The meeting will focus on progress in the implementation of cooperation frameworks between the two organizations, but also on the joint action and challenges linked to peace, security, development, human rights, and the impact of climate change on the African continent. Discussions this year will also include the implementation of the Pact for the Future, as well as the operationalization of Security Council Resolution 2719, which, as you will recall, establishes the framework for financing of African Union-led peace support operations through United Nations assessed contributions, something the Secretary General and the chairperson of the African Union Commission had long advocated for. The annual conference will conclude with a joint press conference by the Secretary General and the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat. It will be available on UN Web TV shortly after. Later in the day, the Secretary General will go to the UN Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa, where he will take part in the re-inauguration ceremony of Africa Hall, which is reopening after extensive renovations to transform it into a modern conference center. We expect the ceremony to be webcast live on UN Web TV. While in Addis Ababa, the Secretary General is also scheduled to hold meetings with the President and Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Speaking of UN-African Union relations, I'd like to note that on the 15th of October, the Peace and Security Council of the African Union and the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission convened their 7th annual consultative meeting at the ECOSOC chamber here at UN headquarters. The meeting highlighted the collaborative peacebuilding efforts of the AU Peace and Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission for peacebuilding and sustaining peace in Africa, as well as the comprehensive review and progress of the status of implementation of outcomes of the 6th informal meeting in November 2023. They also noted that more work still needs to be done in supporting peacebuilding efforts. We have a note with more details on that meeting. Firing continued across parts of Lebanon and northern Israel today, with Israeli strikes in Saida, Nabatea, Jazin, Becca, and Mount Lebanon, as well as the UNIFIL area of operations, while strikes by Hezbollah into northern Israel, including towards Haifa and the Israeli-occupied Golan, also continued. Our colleagues in the UN Interim Force in Lebanon report that the high levels of fire across the Blue Line have persisted, with UNIFIL detecting 966 projectiles over the past 24 hours. The vast majority of these projectiles originated from south of the Blue Line, primarily striking Ait al-Shab in Sector West and Al-Wazani and Meis al-Jabal in Sector East, while 68 projectiles were recorded originating from north of the Blue Line. The missile also noted 70 air violations by the IDF into Lebanese airspace, breaking the previous day's record for daily violations since October 2023. Furthermore, clashes on the ground between Hezbollah and the Israeli Defense Forces within the UNIFIL area of operations continue, with fatalities reported on each side. Additionally, this morning, peacekeepers reported that one of UNIFIL's patrols that was resupplying a UN position in Sector East observed an impact less than 50 meters from its location. The patrol returned safely to its location of origin and no injuries were reported. UNIFIL continues to reiterate the importance of ensuring the safety and security of peacekeepers and reminds all actors of their obligations in that regard. In a video message to the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, the Secretary General said that he is full of admiration and gratitude to the men and women of UNIFIL. He said that we are all very well aware of their bravery during some of the most challenging moments in the history of UNIFIL. The Secretary General reaffirmed that the safety of United Nations personnel is our highest priority and that the inviolability of UN premises must be respected at all times. He added that our path forward is clear. We need an immediate ceasefire and the full implementation of Resolution 1701. The Secretary General told the peacekeepers, "You're not just on the Blue Line in Lebanon, you are literally on the front line of peace." The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that airstrikes continue deepening the crisis in areas of Lebanon already grappling with the displacement of people. According to Lebanese authorities, 1.2 million people have been displaced or otherwise directly affected by the crisis. The International Organization for Migration has identified nearly 780,000 displaced people and says that more than 190,000 of them are now staying in over 1,000 shelters, most of them in Mount Lebanon Governorate and Beirut. Preliminary assessments led by the Lebanese authorities showed that there are 4 times more displaced people living outside formal shelters, primarily from Daye, South Lebanon, Baalbek, and West Bekaa. Many of them are highly vulnerable and are at risk of homelessness and precarious housing situations. Meanwhile, we and our partners continue to support the response across the country. On October 17th, yesterday, the World Health Organization delivered 35 tons of trauma supplies, treatments for acute malnutrition, and medicines for chronic disease, enough to help 200,000 people. The supplies will be delivered to priority referral hospitals identified by the Ministry of Public Health. For its part, the UN Population Fund has distributed more than 10,000 dignity kits to displaced women and girls in collective shelters across Beirut, Mount Lebanon, Akkar, the north, Bekaa, and the south. During the distributions, UNFPA teams also provided psychological first aid and referral of women and girls at risk of gender-based violence. You'd asked me yesterday about the Secretary General's reaction to the death of Yahya Sinwar. I can tell you that although he does not comment on events of this nature, the Secretary General is interested that this now leads to an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and unrestricted humanitarian access to Gaza. I'd like to add that Tor Vennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, took note of the killing in Gaza yesterday of Yahya Sinwar. Mr. Vennesland said that today, we are at a critical juncture. We must seize the moment to silence the guns, and release the hostages now. He calls on all sides to engage in dialogue and reach a deal. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continues to sound the alarm about the increasingly dire and dangerous situation that civilians in the northern part of Gaza are facing. Families there are trying to survive in atrocious conditions under heavy bombardment. The UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, has confirmed another attack on one of its schools in the north, the third such attack on the agency's facilities this week alone. Scores of people who were sheltering there, including children, were reportedly killed when the school in Jabalia was hit yesterday. OCHA warns that the ongoing lack of access to the Jabalia area is having life-threatening impacts. Today, OCHA submitted an urgent request for the Israeli authorities to facilitate the evacuation of a few dozen people reported to be alive and trapped under rubble. We are now awaiting a green light. In previous instances, OCHA accompanied rescue teams whose access was facilitated too late, resulting in only dead bodies being recovered. The UN and our partners also stand ready to provide food for essential operations like water pumping and medical equipment, and also to deliver much-needed food supplies in Jabalia and elsewhere. As you'll recall, no food supplies entered the north in early October, and the World Food Program was only able to reach about 100,000 people, given supply shortages, access restrictions, and ongoing fighting. On Tuesday, 12 trucks of wheat flour entered northern Gaza after 2 weeks of closed crossings, but those supplies were only enough for 9,200 families. We call on the Israeli authorities to allow safe, rapid, sustained, and unimpeded access to Jabalia and all areas of the north where people are in desperate need of assistance. Aid organizations must be allowed to carry out their life-saving work across the Strip. Meanwhile, in southern Gaza, the World Health Organization says its teams have been on the ground there, delivering supplies to health facilities before the second phase of the polio vaccination campaign starts in the south on Saturday. The UN and our partners aim to provide more than 293,000 children in southern Gaza with the second dose of the vaccine and more than 284,000 with vitamin A supplements. The Secretary General has transmitted to the President of the General Assembly the report of the eminent person, former Chief Justice of Tanzania, Mr. Mohamed Chande Uthman, concerning the investigation into the conditions and circumstances resulting in the tragic death of Dag Hammarskjöld and of the members of the party accompanying him. The Secretary General's letter to the President of the General Assembly is accompanied by the eminent person's report and will be publicly available as a General Assembly document, A/78/1006. At this juncture, the eminent person assesses it to remain plausible that an external attack or threat was a cause of the crash. The eminent person notes that the alternative hypotheses that appear to remain available are that the crash resulted from sabotage or unintentional human error. The Secretary General notes that the eminent person considers that it is almost certain that specific, crucial, and to date undisclosed information exists in the archives of member states. The Secretary General further notes that the eminent person's assessment that he has not received, to date, specific responses to his specific queries from certain member states. The Secretary General has personally followed up on the eminent person's outstanding requests for information and calls upon member states to release any relevant records in their possession. With significant progress having been made, the Secretary General calls on all of us to renew our resolve and commitment to pursue the full truth of what happened on that fateful night in 1961. And we have a full statement available that will be emailed to you shortly. The Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, today wrapped up a 2-day visit to Somalia and reaffirmed the UN support for the country's peace and state building. While in Mogadishu, Ms. DiCarlo met with President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud and senior members of his team for wide-ranging discussions, in addition to meeting with representatives of civil society. In her meeting with the President, Ms. DiCarlo noted Somalia's many achievements in the past year, including debt relief under the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative, the accession to the East African Community, and the lifting of the arms embargo. She also met with the special representative of the chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia and head of the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, Ambassador Mohammed El-Amin Souef, and other international partners. Turning to Cameroon, the Acting Emergency Relief Coordinator, Joyce Msuya, has allocated $4 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund to support the flood responses in the country. The resources will support more than 200,000 vulnerable people in the departments of Logon Eshari and Mayo Denai in the far north region, the most affected by the floods, with health, shelter, food, water, and sanitation assistance. Since August this year, torrential rains in the far north region have triggered floods affecting over 350,000 people. More than 50,000 homes and over 80,000 hectares of farmland have been damaged. Health centers and schools have also been impacted. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our peacekeeping operation there, MONUSCO, continues to support the government to encourage the demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration of ex-combatants. This week, the mission repatriated 4 ex-combatants from Rwanda, along with a dependent woman. Since the beginning of 2023, the mission has repatriated 76 ex-combatants and 40 dependents from Rwanda. Meanwhile, the mission also continues to protect civilians in Ituri and North Kivu. In Ituri, the mission met with women traders in Fataki and local leaders in Komanda. Peacekeepers also deployed to Kokola and Makpiki in North Kivu to assess security conditions in the area. And for briefings, at 2 p.m., there will be a briefing here by the special rapporteurs on the rights to food, water, and housing. They are Michael Fakri, Pedro Aroja Agudo, and Balakrishna Rajagopal, respectively. Then on Monday, my guest will be Andrea Tenenti, spokesperson for the UN Interim Force in Lebanon. He'll be here to brief you from UNIFIL House in Beirut on the situation in the country. And at 1:30 p.m., there will be a briefing here by the chair of the Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, Gabriela Citroni. That's it for me. Yes, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. Has the Secretary General been making any calls since the death of Yahya Sinwar, and does he have any comment on the possible impact of his death on prospects for ending the war in Gaza?
In terms of calls, I mean, he has been in touch with a number of officials in the system, including with Tor Vennesland, and so he is discussing this more widely. I don't have calls to other leaders to share with you. I would like to repeat what I said at the top of the briefing, that the Secretary General is interested, that this now leads to an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and unrestricted humanitarian access to Gaza. And a number of officials, including Mr. Vennesland, are working along those lines.
I have one other question related to Gaza. Can we get an update on the actual number of trucks that have entered Gaza and fuel both to the north and to the center and the south?
Okay, certainly. I'll try to get a full number of all of the trucks that have entered. The basic point is that there's been almost nothing going into the north since the start of October, and we've been trying to get more aid going in, but the numbers that which we flagged from time to time in the humanitarian parts of these briefings, those numbers have been very limited. So we remain very concerned about how much aid there is going into the north. Yes, Gabriel and then Stefano.
Thank you, Farhan. You mentioned that OSHA has talked to Israeli authorities today about urgently evacuating some people out of Gaza that immediately need medical attention. Mm-hmm. Does one of those include Al Jazeera cameraman Fadi Al-Wahidi, who is in a coma in Gaza and has been pleading to get out of Gaza to receive medical attention to save his life? Do you know that?
I don't have any particular detail about whether Mr. Al-Wahidi is among those evacuated. I'll inquire with our OCHA colleagues after this, but certainly our thoughts go to your colleague, and we are hoping for his recovery. Yes, Stefano.
Thank you, Farhan. Two questions. One is about UNIFIL and the message that the Secretary General just did. He's been saying, and not only him, that attacking or targeting the peacekeepers is a war crime. That means that this is going to be investigated no matter what, or actually that you need, I don't know, the situation even getting worse, where there is some death or something, to really be a war crime? What is the situation at the moment?
Well, our standard practice when there are attacks on peacekeepers is to follow up, and so we will pursue any further accountability that needs to be taken for those actions. But right now, of course, what we want is for the situation to calm down.
Then a question about migrants. Italy started to send migrants to Albania. Is this for the Secretary General could be an offshoring model for Europe, or is it illegal?
I would just refer you to our colleagues in the UN Refugee Agency, who I believe are looking into that situation. Yes, please.
Thank you, Farhan. I have two questions about the Western Sahara. Secretary General Special Envoy to the Sahara, Mr. Staffan de Mistura, gave a briefing in a consultation a couple of days ago, which he submitted an old proposal. I don't know what's the reason behind it, that for the partition of the Sahara among the conflicting parties. My question for this particular incident: did the Secretary General signed off on this previously rejected proposal to be resubmitted? This is number one. And my second question is, since it was presented in a consultation, the transcript of Mr. de Mistura was distributed to member states as well as member of the press in the United Nations. This, which is a departure from Mr. de Mistura's previous stance in keeping things close to his chest and almost working discreetly away from the media interaction. What's the reasons for that, and does this mean that Mr. de Mistura is now open to come to the briefing room and sit and take questions from the member of the press at the UN, or not? Thank you.
Well, regarding your first question, I wouldn't characterize anything as a submission of a proposal. What I would say is that the personal envoy, Mr. de Mistura, was essentially briefing the Security Council on his his work on the Western Sahara file, and he looks forward to engaging with all concerned on advancing the process constructively in the period ahead of the next closed consultations, which are expected to take place next April in 2025, and to report on any progress. So the question is to see what the members of council and the parties themselves want to embrace as a way forward for Western Sahara. And regarding your second question, I don't really have any comment on how documents spread to members of the council or so forth. I mean, the nature of the UN is sometimes documents get to people.
Please
Yes.
follow up.
Yeah.
Did the Secretary General sign off on this idea, or if you don't characterize it as a proposal, did he sign off on this idea knowing that 20 years ago or more, Mr. James Baker, former US Secretary of State, was a special envoy to the Sahara, and he submitted that proposal, exact proposal, and it was rejected. So did Mr. Guterres, did he sign off on this new approach?
Well, again, I wouldn't mischaracterize what Mr. de Mistura is doing. He's essentially looking with the parties and with the members of the Security Council to see what way forward there can be for Western Sahara. I wouldn't characterize anything as a proposal that is his proposal. Regarding the history of the proposals, certainly Mr. de Mistura and the Secretary General are well aware of the history of Western Sahara. Yes, please.
Thank you, Farhan. My question is about BRICS Summit, which is scheduled to start this Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could inform us if Secretary General is planning to attend it, and if he does, then will he meet President Putin? Thank you.
I don't have any announcement to make about the BRICS Summit at this point. We'll let you know if there's any announcement to be made later on. Yes, please.
Thank you. Recently, the International Criminal Court announced a renewed investigation into the alleged crimes that are committed within the DRC. And I just wanted to get from the office of the Secretary General, do you hope this renewed investigation will bring change to the people in the DRC, specifically those in the northern Kivu province? And how does the UN assess the potential implications of this investigation on the DRC as well as regional stability?
Well, because of the independence of the International Criminal Court, we don't comment specifically on their prosecution. So I'm going to do that here. But certainly the Secretary General hopes that any proceedings involving the Democratic Republic of the Congo that help to achieve any measure of accountability will help with the overall situation in that country. Yes, Gabriel.
Thank you, Farhan. Just going back to the SG's travel, I missed it at the top. I'm sorry. He's going to be there the 20th of October and the 21st. Can you just confirm that I caught that correctly? And does he have any press availability when
he
he's
arrives
there?
on the 20th. He'll be there for high-level discussions on the 21st. And the annual conference will conclude with a joint press conference with the Secretary General and Moussa Faki. And we do expect that our UN Web TV will be able to air that.
Thank you, Farhan. And just on Jabalia in the north of Gaza, there are reports coming in that Israel has cut off all internet and communications to much of the north of Gaza this today. Is there any reason that this needs to be happening, and what is the Secretary General's response to cutting off all communications to people that are already under siege?
Well, we're concerned about any efforts that would limit our ability to get information about what's happening to Jabalia. And you heard just now what I said about the situation there. Yes, please.
Thank you. There was a belief that killing the Palestinian leader Yahya Sinwar would lead to the end of this war. Netanyahu made it clear yesterday that the war will not stop. Now it's clear that this war is about more than what happened on October 7th. we can see it as an extension of Israel's colonial project in the region and continuation of the daily occupation and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians since 1948. Why is it so hard to the international community and its organization to see this clearly?
I feel like that's more of an editorial comment than a question, but our views on this are what I relayed earlier. And with that, have a great weekend, everyone. Take care of yourselves.